All right, well, we're in the shop today, and today we're finally going to be doing some of the most needed upgrades for my Turbo LS street truck here, and that is the aesthetic department. So we've had this truck up, running, and driving for about a year now. It's solid in the powertrain department. It's got a 6-liter that I put together with rods, pistons, cam, valve springs, all that good stuff. It's got a VS Racing turbo. It's got a built 480V transmission. It's got a billet converter. And it runs well. It makes good power. It blows the tires off. It's a lot of fun to drive. We just went through and rebuilt the exhaust to quiet this thing up. We had side pipes coming out in front of the tire. It was way too loud for a street truck. And that was one of my biggest nuisances with this thing, and one of the reasons I didn't drive it. But the second biggest issue I have with this thing is the looks just aren't there. This thing looks like a work truck. I mean, it's got the sleeper factor going on, but we want to make this thing look cool. I'm ready to finish this thing out like I had planned to from the beginning, and that is finally what we're doing. So the first step in that process is to get rid of this thing's altitude problem. You can see this thing is completely stock ride height. It's got 31-inch all-terrains on it. It just doesn't look the part of a Turbo LS street truck. So what we have is a 5.7 drop kit from DJM Suspension. So 5.7 means 5 inches in the front, 7 inches in the rear. And the reason why the numbers are different is because naturally they're a little lower in the front. So when you load the truck up, it sits level. So we're gonna be lowering it and leveling it, more or less. So I did a lot of research. I debated on which kit to get. There's a lot of different kits available for this. As far as brands are concerned, there's also different ways to achieve the same thing. And I think DJM's setup is kind of the best way to do it, to get everything I want. I still want it to ride nice. I still want it to drive well. I still want it to align out correctly. So with the DJM kit, we're getting our drop with these lowering control arms. So we're gonna keep the stock spring, we're gonna keep our stock knuckle, but we're gonna lower the truck with the lower control arms. We also have upper control arms, and one of the neat things about doing it this way is a lot of these bushings are shot anyway. Our lower control arm bushings, our uppers, our ball joints, all that stuff really would need to be replaced while we were in there. And with this drop kit, we're replacing it all with these control arms. We're upgrading to poly bushings. That's gonna tighten up the suspension dramatically. We've got new sway bar links, new lower ball joints, new upper ball joints to go in the upper control arms. We've also got new shocks front and rear. And then for the rear, our 7-inch drop, we have basically an axle flip kit. The axle is gonna go up on top of the leaf spring instead of below it. We have a C-notch set up here to go on the frame. We are gonna have to notch the frame, otherwise the axle would just be sitting tucked up against the frame. I've heard a lot of good things about it. It came highly recommended, so that's the direction we went. That's what we're gonna do. So that being said, suspension stuff is always a lot of fun. We need to get this thing back up in the air and start tearing all of our old worn out junk off. All right, guys, before we get too deep into today's video, I wanted to talk to you about today's video sponsor, Factor. So Factor delivers fresh, never frozen meals right to your door that are ready in 2 minutes. And that is absolutely huge year round, but especially during the summer. I mean, we have events back to back to back to back. The cars are always broken. You know, they're getting thrashed every weekend. There's always stuff to do on the truck and the trailer. There's never seemingly enough time. That is the most valuable resource for me in the summertime, is time. And with Factor, I can eat well. I can meet my health goals of eating good, real quality food that actually tastes really good too, without having to sacrifice my time to do it. Now, not to mention, Factor is flexible. I can change my order size to suit what's going on. You know, if I'm going out of town for a week, I can adjust my order size to make sure I don't get more than I need, since I'm not gonna be there. So it's really flexible, and it's really helpful for someone like me who's always got a lot of stuff going on, and I really never know what's gonna happen from one day to the next. I'm not great at planning ahead. It makes my life a lot easier. It saves me a lot of time, saves me money on takeout. It's been incredible. I've recommended it to so many close friends because it's really one of those things that ticks all the boxes. Now, when you combine that with HelloFresh, which actually owns Factor now, you've pretty much covered the whole spectrum of any type of eating situation you need. We like to bounce back and forth between them depending on how much time we have. So the cool thing about that is not only do I get to switch it up, but you can too. I can get you a discount code either way. So speaking of discount codes, if you're interested in trying out Factor for yourself, seeing how much time and money it can save you, and seeing how delicious the meals are firsthand, because I love them. They have over 34, and I've liked every single one that I've tried. Head to factor75.com and use code TaylorDrifts50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. It's a great deal. It's a great way to try it out and see firsthand. You don't have to listen to me. You don't have to take it from me. Try it out. Let me know what you think. So that being said, we've got a lot of work to do. Speaking of time, not a lot of time to do it. We're going to get back to it. zoned out for a second there and forgot we were working on the suspension. Used to just sending them all the way to the moon. All right, so as you can see here, our suspension is definitely a little worse for wear. I mean, the boot on this one is in multiple pieces at this point. The bushings don't look too great. As I said, it could all stand to be replaced, so works out perfect doing it this way. So yeah, I would like to upgrade the brakes on this eventually, but that's off topic. We're going down a tangent, rabbit hole. Time to get back to work. Let's dive in. So I started tackling tearing this thing apart. Since I'm working solo for the next couple days, I had a plan on how I wanted to approach this to try to make it easier. Sometimes you try to make things easier on yourself and make it less work and you end up doing more work, but we're going to give this a shot. My plan is to replace the upper control arm and then do the lower and everything else. That way we can leave the caliper and the rotor and all of that stuff attached to the truck, not have to take everything off the suspension and make our lives a little bit simpler. But this upper control arm, first thing to take off was a fight, man. These ball joint ends did not want to come off. You know, I tried the pickle fork multiple different ways, tried the air hammer, tried it with it off and unbolted, bolted it back to the chassis, and I ended up coming up with a plan, fortunately, that actually worked for getting this stuck thing out of there. Just when I was about to give up hope. Oh, okay. I had to take the stick off. I could wail really well on this thing. So once I got the upper control arm out, finally, it was time to start assembling the new control arm. So I went ahead and put the grease fittings in, and then I was a little bit unsure on which direction the control arm went, which side to bolt the ball joint on. I tried it both ways. I tried it the way that looked right, but I was having a little bit of trouble with the bolts. I wasn't 100% sure if this was right, and I flipped it around, and looking at the suspension drooped, it looked like it should go this way. Foreshadowing, this is not the way it's supposed to go, and we learned that way later on. But for now, it's bolted together, and this is a little comparison of the old stock control arm with the destroyed ball joint and bushings and the new shiny ones. So it's time to get these installed the wrong way so that we can move on to taking apart the rest of the suspension, which hopefully isn't as much of a fight as that upper control arm was. So getting these bolts in is a little challenging. They go from the inside and they kind of clash with the spring, and you've got to work with the eccentric, but we managed to get the bolts in there as much as it was a fight, get everything snugged up in kind of a center setting. We don't know exactly how much camber is going to be what with each setting, so we're going to have to determine that once we get it all assembled and put back on the ground. So once we had the upper control arm in to hold all that stuff up, we could go ahead and pull the shock out and try to get the spring compressor in there and compress the spring. So I went for one that goes on the inside, and it was just no good way to orient it to get it to work. We're gonna have to do this the old school way and basically lower this thing with a jack. Now, this lower ball joint is kind of strange. Instead of coming into the knuckle from the bottom, it comes in from the top. So we've basically got to compress the spring enough to pull the knuckle out of the way, and then we can lower the control arm down with the spring and try to get everything out. Now, obviously the spring's under tension, so this is sketchy and dangerous. You got to be careful when you're doing this kind of stuff. Otherwise, you'll have a spring come flying out at you, and I can tell you from personal experience, that's not fun. Be careful with springs. Things can get hairy. All right, well, you can see we've got this side disassembled. You can see we've got the new upper control arm in. That is basically just holding the knuckle in place so we didn't have to take all of this stuff off. So now we need to install our lower and start replacing the other stuff like the inner and outer tie rod. Basically put it all back together from this point. We're all the way apart. So before we start installing this stuff, here's a quick look at our old versus new on the upper, and our old versus new on the lower. So you can see the drop. This is where the bottom of the spring sits on the stock control arm, and this is where it sits on the DJM control arm. So it basically drops the spring down, which is going to drop our ride height down, without changing up all this geometry and things like that. We're basically just lowering the spring, but still keeping the full spring and shock stroke, which is really neat. I really like that approach to doing this drop kit. So that being said, enough jibber jabber. We need to get back to work. I want to get this side back together so we can slam out the other side and try to move on to the rear. So I wasn't sure how this was going to go, trying to get this spring back up into place. Letting down a control arm to decompress the spring is one thing, but compressing it back into place is another. So we got everything in place, and fortunately it went together pretty well. I mean, these springs aren't super stiff, so you're not fighting it that much, but trying to get this thing up high enough to get the ball joint in was definitely a challenge. I had to play with the upper and the lower, but eventually I was able to get them both in and tighten down, and the front suspension is together again. All right, well, one side done. This thing's got a lot of travel, man. That is going to be good for us if we're trying to launch this thing on bad surfaces. So we still got to do the sway bar link, and we've still got to do the inner and outer tie rod, but I want to go ahead and get the control arms on the other side and then do those together. The sway bar is going to be last because we have to basically do both sides at the same time. So you know the deal. Enough jibber jabber. Let's get to work on the other side. So we're going to just go with the same approach on this side. It worked on the first side. We might as well stick to the plan. I was able to get this upper ball joint out a little more easily than the last one, partially because I knew just to take the handle off the pickle fork so I could get a good swing at it and wail on it. So we got that out. We got the upper control arm in. Josue showed up, so he started working on tearing the rest of it apart while I started working on finishing up the first side that we started on. So I need to get the new shock in. We got to get the tie rod swapped out. So we got a few things to do there. So I went ahead and got the shock in and bolted up and started working on pulling the tie rods out. These things were smoked. They weren't on the original plan to replace, but they definitely needed it. I mean, we're replacing pretty much everything else. We might as well replace those too. So as I was working on that, Josue started the very joyous process of tearing apart the driver's side. Now, the ironic thing here is on the passenger side, the first side, the lower control arm ball joint came out pretty easily. It wasn't really much of a struggle. I didn't even have to really pickle fork it. But on the driver's side, it's a whole other story. The top one, the upper came out pretty easy. The bottom one, no chance. Not even considering coming out. All right, well, on that side, the lower control arm ball joint just popped out. On this side, we have not been so lucky. Gotta pull the whole thing off as an assembly. We're gonna try to see if we can squeeze it in the press, which I don't think we can, but we're gonna try. I hate ball joints. Ball joints are my least favorite thing when it comes to cars.
I can agree with that. Suspension wise for sure.
But the whole car, I'd rather do anything else.
I can agree.
Than a ball joint. Any sort of ball joint.
Oh yeah, we'll be fine, and then here we are.
Yeah, no, literally anything else. I can't think of a single thing that I dislike more than dealing with ball joints. We could try air hammer with it on the ground. I'm so glad I recorded that.
Nice job. Nice job.
Normally I don't record the struggle, and then I'm like, oh yeah, we fought it, but you never understand how much of a fight. I mean, they didn't even see the half of it, but
right.
Be careful. Just let it sit
No,
for
it's
a
still
minute.
good. Nice.
All right, mission accomplished. So now that we had everything disassembled, we could start the reassembly process on this side, which is a little more involved since we had to pull the knuckle and the lower control arm off together. We had to take the caliper and the rotor off, and honestly, in hindsight, I probably should have done this on the other side because it was a bit of a fight trying to leave the knuckle in there. It was just, one of those things. It's in the way. As I said before, sometimes less work equals more work, and that was kind of the case. But regardless, it's going back together. We had to do it that way on this side, and Josue's hammering out putting it back together while I'm working on finishing up the driver's side. So he got that all squared away, and now we need to finish tackling these tie rods. We need to get these swapped out, and then that's pretty much it for the front suspension besides the sway bar and links. So we're chugging right along. We're getting there. Finally. All right, well, we've got the front pretty well put back together on this thing. All of the DJM arms. So those were great. I mean, those went on super easy. The easiest part of this whole thing was installing the new stuff, but getting the old stuff off was, we were not so lucky, but lower control arms in, upper control arms in, centric deals are in. New shock is in, so we still got to do our tie rods, our sway bar links, and then that wraps up the front. So I was planning on reusing our boots here, but as you can see, they're pretty toast. So we got new boots, we got new inner tie rods, we got new outer tie rods, all new everything for the front. Should feel really nice now. That stuff was all pretty dang clapped. So that being said, we got work to do still. I'm gonna quit jibber jabbering, get this front end wrapped up so we can dive into the rear. Should be easier and harder at the same time. We'll see. Let's get back to it. So I went ahead and started swapping the fresh tie rods in. Always so satisfying putting new tie rods in something. I feel like on daily drivers, they're one of those things that gets extended way past its service life, and they make a big difference in the way a car drives and feels, or in this case, a truck. So we got the inners in, we got the new boots on, we got the outers on, got them put in the knuckle. We do still need to align it, but for now, we're just trying to get it close. So once those were roughly attached, we went ahead and started working on the sway bar and links. Something that's important to note when you're doing anything with the sway bar is that whatever you do to one side, you're doing to the other side. So it's important to make sure that you take that into account and you don't end up fighting yourself with one end in the wrong place. So with that out of the way, the front is more or less wrapped up. We can finally move on to the rear. We need to pull the leaf springs out so that we can jack the axle up and swap them from being above the axle to under the axle. It's basically the majority of what we're doing here. It's just taking it from being on top of the axle to underneath the axle. So we start getting everything unbolted and we run into some problems right off the bat with the bolts are not going to come out with the trailer hitch in here. So we got to get that pulled out and taken out of the way. And then we ran into some problems with bushings and sleeves. This is something I've ran into on a number of occasions, multiple different vehicles, builds. When a bolt goes through a steel sleeve and a bushing and it's exposed to the weather, it can be a serious fight. They basically like to weld themselves together, and that's what happened in this case. All right, well, we got these problematic bolts out. You can see why they're problematic. Bushing bolts, man, they like to seize to the inner steel sleeve, and that's what these did. But we were able to get them out, so that's good. This leaf spring came out. However, this bolt has to go out that way, but there's a whole fuel tank in the way. So we're gonna try to just loosen the fuel tank and shimmy it out of the way enough to get the bolt out, so we don't have to drop the whole fuel tank. Because what I would use to drop the fuel tank is the transmission jack, but that's a little bit preoccupied at the moment, holding the axle. Stuff. Anyway, we'll figure it out. We'll get it out. This is more GM stuff. And we realized that we put the control arms backwards, upside down. I did. My dyslexia. I thought they went the other way at first, but to get all the bolts to line up nicely, it went in better this way. So, you know, one of those things when you're cruising along and you're not thinking about it, you make mistakes. Just trying to jam out and get it done. Anyway, we got to basically take both upper control arms back out, unbolt the ball joints, flip them, put them back together. More or less, but we want to at least get the rear to where it's not suspended by a transmission jack first.
Easy peasy.
Women.
Squeezy. Let's go.
Falls and smashes.
I'm just making sure the bolts break loose.
I'm
first.
just trying to get the viral video clip.
They're coming on down me.
Bro, why was that guy just filming, not helping?
What is the plan though for real to hold it on?
You know. I think the straps will. I think the straps will kind of hold it.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see.
Like let it kind of swing down with the straps, maybe. We might have to loosen that cylinder neck. I'll put the camera down. So after messing around, it was time to get back to work and see if we can do this without pulling the tank out all the way. So we jimmied it around and we managed to get the bolt out. We are good to go. So now before we swap the leaf springs and put the axle back in the way, it's time to cut for our C-notch. Now, since the gas tank was still in there, I didn't want to use anything that was going to create a ton of sparks, i.e. a grinder. So I decided to use a Sawzall. I was hoping it would give me a little bit more precise of a cut, but it was just a challenge to work around everything that was in there. You know, if we had taken the axle out, it would have been easier. If we had pulled the bed off, it would have been easier, but we're working with what we got and we're working with the plan that we started with. So we managed to get the hole roughly cut, but it is not a clean cut. So I had to go back with the die grinder and clean it up to get the shape a little bit better, and then I got everything to fit correctly. Now, I decided last minute that why drill a bunch of big holes when I have a welder and I know how to weld? I might as well just weld this thing in and make my life way easier. But I kind of didn't account for one critical factor there, and that is that the bed is still on it. This would be super easy if the bed wasn't on it, but the bed is on it. So I started welding out the sides and working my way around the bottom, and I realized that I was not going to be able to weld all the way across the top. There was just no way of welding all the way around this C-notch bracket. So at this point, we're already committed, so we're going to kind of stick to the plan, but change it up a little bit. I'm going to weld as much as I can, and then we're going to bolt the rest. It's just, we got to do what we got to do. So since we had pulled the gas tank out, since we had decided to weld it, we could use the grinder on this other side. So I went ahead and ground in little scribe lines. It just makes it easier to keep the cut straight when you're actually digging in and there's a lot of load and you're cutting it, and started working on cutting this out with a grinder, which is just a little bit more precise of a way to do it. Now, I'm not generally a fan of cutting things with a cutoff disc. It's just a messy process. Sparks go everywhere. The dust from the disc and the metal dust goes everywhere. You're breathing it in if you're not wearing a respirator. It's a whole mess, but it is the most accurate way for me to cut this and get the shape that I'm trying to go for without having to have a bunch of different steps in the way. So once I got the hole cut and everything fit nicely, I went ahead and ground it down, held the bracket in place, and tacked it up. But what I didn't realize was that the bottom was pulled out and it wasn't sitting flush. So instead of welding it and regretting it later and knowing forever in the back of my mind that that was there and that was crooked, even though it probably wouldn't matter that much, I cut the tacks, went back, got it all positioned again, got it clamped down, got it re-tacked. Way easier to do that now than later. And then we were ready to weld it out. Now this time I made sure to open the shop bay door and get a fan going, because when you're welding on some old steel frame rails like this, there's a bunch of junk and grime on there. Besides just the normal weld fumes, you're just burning stuff off when everything gets hot. So it can get pretty messy. So we got that done, got it welded the same as the other side, and then it was time to punch and drill our holes. Now these frame rails are pretty thick, so it's going to take some time to drill. But one important tip, this is something that a surprising amount of people do not know. When you're drilling through steel specifically, you can get away with this on aluminum, but when you're drilling through steel, you need to drill slow. A lot of times the slower you drill, the faster you will drill through the hole. You can see the big chunks coming off, and I can usually touch my drill bits after drilling a hole through steel and they're not hot. I mean, even at the tip. So, and they last forever. They stay sharp that way. I know people who are like, man, my bits dull out all the time. I don't know why. And they're drilling too fast. It took me a while to learn that, and it's a hard thing to force yourself to do, but it's worth it. I promise. Drill slow, drill fast. So anyway, holes are drilled. We got our bolts in, we got everything tightened up. Now it's time to push the axle up into place so that we can pop the leaf springs in here under it. That's kind of cool. My measurements were perfect. If you saw the episode where I built the exhaust, I was worried about clearance, but I was like, the center of the diff should hit this crossbar before the axle hits the exhaust. And it's literally, this is wedged. This is just about to touch. So we should be good. If anything, it'll self-clearance. So we got our notch in, welded and bolted. Obviously it would have been great to pull the bed off, but I didn't have a bed lift and rabbit hole, one of those things. Bada bing, bada boom, double secured. So that's all done. Threw some paint on there to prevent rust. Now it's time to get the leaf springs back in with our new shackles and everything, and then bolt it all up. We got to swap the shocks. We still got to put the fuel tank back in. We got a bit to do. So I'm going to quit jibber jabbering and get back to work. All right, this is the home stretch. We've got to get these leaf springs back in, get everything hooked up and tightened down. So we went ahead and tossed the first leaf spring in. We got new shackles. We cleaned up the hardware. So this should go a lot easier than it did with them coming out. So we got the first one in. We got the second one in. We went ahead and tightened up the bolts for the shackle and the bolt for the front mount. And then we were ready to drop the axle down onto the leaf spring. This is really the big moment where we don't have to support this thing anymore. So we got the pinion angle set, we got the axle down on the leaf spring in the bottom part of the bracket, and then we basically put the top part of the bracket on, which is going to tighten everything down and secure the axle, locate it left and right, and keep it from rotating around. And then we can do the final step of putting the U-bolts in and putting the bracket on and tightening everything down. So with all that done, it's time for what would have been not even a step, but our final step of putting the fuel tank back in. So it's a little bit tricky. It's a pretty good sized tank for the location that it goes in, and it's got to get up there perfect, and you got to finagle the lines around and all of that good stuff. But with the two of us, we managed to get it back up into place, tightened down, especially now that we have the transmission jack to use again. And then the last thing, I said last thing, but this is an accessory, is to put the hitch back on. I have a dream of towing my open trailer with my Ellis Miata on it, the Miata doing a burnout and the truck doing a burnout towing the trailer. I haven't done that yet. I've been meaning to, but it's a dream. We're trying to keep that dream alive, so the hitch has to go back on. All right, well, the suspension is all fully installed. You can see the front here. We got the control arms flipped around the right way. It happens, oversight. So that's done. That's all back together. The only thing we have left to do is align it, and then we can lock down the tie rods. So that's done and dusted. New shock, all the new things up there, and all the new things back here. So we got our axle brackets there. You can see our U-bolts, and then our bracket down here. Boom, done. Got our new shackle back here. Boom. Our notch and our poly bump stop. All done. Oh, and our new shocks. You can see the shock extender bracket that they include with the kit there. Boom, new shocks front and rear. And with that, the suspension, as far as we know, is done and dusted. I guess technically it's still dusty, but you get the idea. So now it's time to put wheels on it, drop it down on the ground, and see what it looks like. We do also have some other parts to install if we've got a little bit of time left over on the aesthetic front. Now we are going to get different wheels. I just haven't decided on what yet. So for right now, I'm hoping the old 31-inch all-terrains are still going to fit, get us by. So you know the deal.
Up to your driver. Let's get back to work.
Boom, you said it, not me.
Let's go. I want to see this thing done.
I know, same.
Yes, hold it.
There, it looks so much better.
Nothing like lowering the truck a little bit.
Dude, even with those tires, like, so much better. I can't wait to drive it. All right, here. A little before real quick, but yeah, this is the current ride height. Front and rear. And now here is the after. What a difference, man. I'm so glad I went with the 5.7. That is literally perfect, even with those tires. I can't wait till we get some better wheels on it, but it doesn't look bad on these. So we're gonna pull it out of the shop, but I just wanted to give you one look before I toss this stuff. This is everything that came off. I mean, this is staying. This is that's our hitch, we need that. But tie rods, inner tie rod boots, arms, pieces of frame, shocks, all new everything. It's a nice feeling. I can't wait to see how this thing drives, dude. Probably gonna feel way better. Now the looks are starting to match the engine bay here, and we still got more to do, but first things first, we need to go drive it before the sun goes down.
Pretty into the fender.
Yeah.
It's starting to fold it over, like the inner lip.
We got our fenders rolled. It might be drivable as is, might be a little too low, but it's tucking. It is tucking. So before we go drive it, since we had to back into the shop anyway, we're gonna do another aesthetic upgrade. We're gonna replace these busted up taillights that stabbed me in the arm recently with some fresh LED ones. And we've also got some brand new, fresh headlights as well, because those are looking crusty. I replaced them, you know, I mean, I guess it's been like 40 years now. But yeah.
How long ago this truck?
Because I've been here for almost 3 years, and I had it for at least a year and a half at Ben's house, so 4.5 years. It's been a long time. Freshies, boy. Fresh headlights, fresh tail lights. Let's go, no more broken tail light. I've got an HD like cowl hood for it. Hopefully Ben hasn't thrown it away yet or sold it. It's still at Ben's house. Basically some body work, some paint, wheel and tires. This thing's gonna be money. And then functionally we need to do the AC still. And then maybe bigger turbo and better fuel system, but we're not gonna cross that rabbit hole. One rabbit hole at a time. It's low, and it's time to go drive it. It's probably gonna bottom out and to rub the tires on the fenders, but man, it looks good. Let's go drive. Let's go drive this thing. My headlights are 2 different colors. Gotta work on that.
I'm like, what?
Oh yeah, put your seatbelts on.
Feels a lot smoother. Does it? Or is it just me over here?
I think so. Oh, it's rubbing.
Something's rubbing. Oh.
And then a spring popped into place just now. We gotta turn
We're
around.
pretty much constantly rubbing at this moment.
Yeah, we gotta turn around. Oh my goodness.
It's settling a little bit too much.
Yeah. I just gotta floor it. Keep the front end up, you know? Oh, it's gonna hurt. Okay, so your DJM kit, your 5.7 drop does not accommodate for 31-inch all-terrains. What a shocker! I'm upset. Well, we can hard park it. Let's see how well this thing looks right now.
Once it's settled.
Yeah. Oh, it's low. All right, well, we got this thing back in the shop because we're gonna have to change the wheel and tire combo, but man, this is giving me a whole new love for this truck. I am so excited to get some good wheels and tires on it and just start driving it. I need to redo the turbo crossover. I forgot about that. It hangs low and I can tuck it up nice and high. But yeah, basically more aesthetic stuff. AC, that's a big one. Need to order the parts for that. We just got to swap to a different compressor and lines to clear all the turbo stuff, and then we can have AC, wheels, tires, and then eventually hood, paint, all that good stuff. But man, I'm pumped. I'm just, it's the whole new love for this truck. Whole new love, because it's been running good, it's been driving good, but it just does not look good. Now it's head down the path. I think it looks pretty cool even with those. If they fit, I'd just rock this for a little while. But anyway, I'm sure this has been a long one. I'm gonna quit jibber jabbering. I'm gonna let you guys go, but I do want to say thank you for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Let me know what you think of the truck, and I sure hope I'll see you next time. Goodbye.